12-year-old Alexander Sterling III had everything money could buy, but he had never met anyone like Marcus until the scholarship kid showed up at Pemberton Academy wearing the same uniform but clearly second-hand shoes. "My dad says your kind doesn't belong here," Alexander whispered during recess. He had no idea he was talking to the heir of a tech empire worth 3 times his family's fortune. Before we begin our story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. The morning sun cast long shadows across the manicured lawns of Pemberton Academy, America's most exclusive private school, where annual tuition cost more than most people's salaries, and admission required not just academic excellence, but the right family connections. Alexander Sterling III walked through the ornate iron gates with the casual confidence of someone who had never questioned his place in the world. At 12 years old, Alexander possessed everything his father's billions could provide: custom-tailored uniforms, the latest iPhone, a personal driver who brought him to school in a different luxury car each day, and the unshakable belief that his family's wealth made him inherently superior to those less fortunate. He was, after all, the heir to Sterling Industries, one of America's largest manufacturing conglomerates. That Tuesday morning started like any other, until Alexander noticed a new face among the familiar crowd of privileged children. A black boy about his age stood quietly near the main building, wearing the required Pemberton uniform, but with subtle differences that Alexander's trained eye immediately cataloged: shoes that had clearly been resoled, a blazer that fit a little too perfectly to be new, and a backpack that looked functional rather than fashionable. "Who's the new kid?" Alexander asked his usual circle of friends as they clustered near the fountain that dominated the school's central courtyard. "Scholarship student," replied Preston Montgomery, whose father owned 3 television networks. "I heard he's some kind of academic genius. You know how they let 1 or 2 of them in each year to make the school look diverse." Alexander studied the newcomer with the detached curiosity of someone observing an exotic animal. The boy seemed completely unbothered by the stares and whispers he was generating, reading what appeared to be a thick technical manual instead of participating in the social dynamics that consumed most 12-year-olds. "Marcus Williams," announced Mrs. Pemberton, the headmaster's wife, as she approached with the new student in tow. "Class, I'd like you to meet Marcus. He'll be joining us from Lincoln Middle School." Lincoln Middle School. Alexander knew that name. It was in the part of the city his father always told their driver to avoid, the area where those people lived in government housing and went to schools that probably didn't even have computers. During morning break, Alexander found himself gravitating toward Marcus, who was sitting alone under an oak tree, still absorbed in his reading. "What's that book about?" Alexander asked, more out of boredom than genuine interest. Marcus looked up with eyes that seemed older than his 12 years. "Quantum computing theory. It's pretty fascinating stuff." Alexander blinked. "Quantum what?" "It's about using quantum mechanical phenomena to perform calculations. Basically, computers that can solve problems regular computers can't handle." Marcus spoke as if he were discussing the weather, completely unaware that most 12-year-olds couldn't even pronounce quantum mechanical phenomena, let alone understand it. "That sounds complicated," Alexander said, sitting down uninvited. Something about Marcus intrigued him, though he couldn't quite put his finger on what it was. "Not really, once you understand the basic principles. Want me to explain it?" For the next 20 minutes, Marcus broke down complex scientific concepts with a clarity that left Alexander both fascinated and slightly intimidated. This wasn't what he had expected from a scholarship kid from the wrong side of town. As days turned into weeks, Alexander found himself increasingly drawn to Marcus, despite, or perhaps because of, everything his family had taught him about social hierarchies and appropriate friendships. Marcus was different from anyone Alexander had ever met, brilliant without being arrogant, confident without being flashy, and genuinely kind in a way that seemed effortless rather than calculated. But Alexander's upbringing couldn't be completely ignored. "My dad says your kind doesn't belong here," Alexander whispered during recess one afternoon, repeating words he had heard at the dinner table the night before. He immediately felt ashamed of saying it, but something compelled him to test the boundaries of their friendship. Marcus stopped bouncing his basketball and looked at Alexander with an expression that was more sad than angry. "What kind is that, Alex?" Alexander shifted uncomfortably. "You know, poor kids. Kids who can't afford to be here without charity." "And what if I could afford to be here?" Marcus asked quietly. "What if money wasn't the issue?" "But you can't," Alexander said, gesturing toward Marcus's worn sneakers and secondhand blazer. "I mean, it's obvious, right? There's nothing wrong with it," he added quickly. "But we can't pretend you come from the same world as the rest of us." Marcus smiled, but there was something mysterious in his expression. "You're right, Alex. I don't come from the same world as you, but maybe not in the way you think." That afternoon, Alexander went home to the Sterling family's 40-room mansion in Beverly Hills, where he found his father, Richard Sterling, reviewing financial reports in his mahogany-paneled study. "Dad," Alexander said, settling into the leather chair across from his father's massive desk, "tell me about the scholarship kids at school." Richard barely looked up from his papers. "What about them? Why do we let them in if they don't belong?" Richard set down his reports and studied his son. "It's about image, Alexander. Schools like Pemberton need to appear inclusive to maintain their tax-exempt status and keep the board happy. But don't be fooled. Those children are there to serve a purpose, not to actually become part of our world." "But what if one of them was really smart, like smarter than us?" Richard laughed, a sound without warmth. "Intelligence without resources is just potential energy, son. It doesn't matter how smart someone is if they don't have the connections, the capital, and the cultural background to do anything meaningful with it." "Marcus seems pretty smart." "Marcus? The new scholarship kid. He was explaining quantum computing to me today." Richard's expression hardened. "Alexander, I want you to be very careful about the friendships you form. These children might seem interesting or even intelligent, but they come from a completely different world. They have different values, different priorities, different ways of thinking about success and responsibility. But, no buts. Your reputation, your future, your family's legacy, these things matter. You can be polite to the scholarship students, but remember who you are and where you come from." Alexander nodded, but something about his father's words felt wrong. Marcus didn't seem different in the ways his father described. If anything, Marcus often demonstrated more kindness, more genuine curiosity, and more thoughtful analysis than most of Alexander's wealthy classmates. The next day, Alexander decided to test his father's theories. "Marcus," he said as they walked to chemistry class together, "what do you want to be when you grow up?" "I'm not sure yet," Marcus replied thoughtfully. "Maybe something in technology development or possibly research. There are so many problems in the world that could be solved with the right innovations." "But don't you want to be rich?" Marcus looked at him strangely. "Why would that be the goal?" "Because rich people get to do whatever they want. They have power, influence, respect. They can buy anything, go anywhere, meet anyone. Money is just a tool, Alex. It's what you do with it that matters. My family taught me that wealth without purpose is just numbers in a bank account." Alexander frowned. "Your family taught you about wealth? But you're on scholarship." Marcus stopped walking and turned to face Alexander with an expression that was both patient and slightly amused. "Alex, can I ask you something?" "Sure." "Why do you assume that someone who doesn't flaunt their money doesn't have any?" The question caught Alexander off guard. Because why would you hide it if you had it?" "Maybe because they understand that true wealth isn't about impressing other people. Maybe because they want to be valued for who they are, not what they own." That afternoon, Alexander found himself paying closer attention to Marcus in ways he never had before. He noticed that Marcus's second-hand clothes, while not flashy, were actually well-made and perfectly fitted. He observed that Marcus's backpack, while functional, was crafted from high-quality materials. Most importantly, he realized that Marcus never seemed concerned about money in the way that truly poor people might be. During lunch, Alexander decided to push further. Marcus, what kind of car does your family have? We have several, Marcus replied casually, not looking up from his sandwich. Several? Like, more than one? Yeah, my mom likes electric vehicles because she's concerned about the environment. My dad prefers hybrids for longer trips, and we have a few others for different purposes. Alexander stared at him. How many is several? Marcus shrugged. I don't really count them. Cars are just transportation. This was not the answer Alexander had expected from a scholarship student. Where do you live? Alexander pressed. About 15 minutes from here. In an apartment? Marcus looked up from his lunch with a slight smile. In a house. What kind of house? The kind with rooms and a kitchen and stuff, Marcus said, clearly enjoying Alexander's confusion. Why are you so curious about where I live? You're on scholarship, right? Am I? Alexander felt like the ground was shifting beneath him. Aren't you? What made you think I was? Everyone said, Mrs. Pemberton introduced you as, your clothes. Marcus nodded, understanding. So because I don't wear designer labels and drive to school in a luxury car, everyone assumed I was poor. Well, yeah. That's interesting, Marcus said thoughtfully. It never occurred to me that people would make that assumption. My parents always taught me that showing off wealth was vulgar. Alexander's mind was reeling. So you're not poor. Define poor. Not having money, having to work for everything, not being able to afford nice things. Marcus considered this. My family has enough money that we don't worry about basic needs. We could afford nice things if we wanted them. We just choose to spend our money on things that matter more to us than impressing strangers. Like what? Education, research, helping other people, supporting causes we believe in. My parents think it's more important to build something meaningful than to collect expensive toys. Alexander was quiet for a long moment, processing this information. So when everyone was calling you a scholarship kid, I let them think whatever they wanted to think. People's assumptions about others usually say more about them than about the people they're judging. That evening, Alexander confronted his father with his new information. Dad, I think you were wrong about Marcus. Richard looked up from his evening cocktail with mild annoyance. Wrong about what? He's not poor. His family has money, maybe a lot of money. Richard laughed dismissively. Alexander, having some money and being wealthy are entirely different things. The boy probably thinks his family is rich because they own their own home and take vacations to Disney World. He said they have several cars. Several used cars, no doubt. And he knows things. Really complicated things about technology and business that most adults don't understand. Book learning isn't the same as real-world experience. Alexander felt frustration building in his chest. Dad, what if you're wrong? What if Marcus's family is actually richer than us? Richard set down his drink with more force than necessary. Alexander, that's impossible. If this boy's family had serious money, we would know about it. The truly wealthy in this country form a very small, very exclusive circle. We know who they are, they know who we are, and we certainly don't send our children to mix with scholarship students at even the most prestigious schools. But what if? Enough, Richard said firmly. You're being manipulated by a clever child who's learned to mimic the behaviors of his betters. Don't let your friendship cloud your judgment about reality. But Alexander couldn't shake the feeling that his father was the one whose judgment was clouded. The next few weeks brought a series of small revelations that continued to challenge Alexander's assumptions about his friend. Marcus casually mentioned reading financial reports for fun. He demonstrated an intuitive understanding of complex economic principles. Most remarkably, he seemed completely unimpressed by displays of wealth that typically awed other children. When Preston Montgomery bragged about his family's new yacht, Marcus listened politely, but without the envy Alexander expected. When Madison Ashford showed off her designer handbag, Marcus complimented it genuinely, but without any apparent desire to own something similar. Don't you want nice things? Alexander asked Marcus one afternoon as they watched their classmates compare expensive watches. I have nice things, Marcus replied, They're just not the kind of things you can wear or drive. Like what? Books, ideas, time with people I care about, the knowledge that my family is using our resources to make the world a little bit better. Alexander found this perspective both admirable and confusing. In his world, wealth was meant to be displayed, enjoyed, and used to establish social position. The idea of having money but not flaunting it was almost incomprehensible. The truth began to emerge in the most unexpected way. During a school project on family businesses, Alexander prepared an elaborate presentation about Sterling Industries, complete with financial charts and projected growth patterns. When it was Marcus's turn, he simply stood up and said, "My family's company develops technology solutions for environmental and social challenges." "What kind of technology?" asked their teacher, Mrs. Henderson. "Primarily renewable energy systems, sustainable transportation, and artificial intelligence applications for resource optimization." Mrs. Henderson looked impressed. "That sounds very advanced. What's the company called?" "Williams Innovations Group." Alexander had never heard of it, but Mrs. Henderson's eyes widened with recognition. "Williams Innovations Group? The company that just revolutionized electric vehicle batteries? The one that developed the new solar panel technology that's 20 times more efficient than current systems?" Marcus nodded modestly. "My parents believe technology should serve humanity, not just generate profits." After class, Alexander cornered Marcus in the hallway. "Williams Innovations Group," he said breathlessly. "I looked it up. Your family's company is worth billions." Marcus shrugged. "Numbers on a balance sheet don't define who we are as people. But you're richer than most of the kids here, richer than my family." "And does that change who I am?" Alexander stared at his friend, his entire worldview crumbling and rebuilding itself simultaneously. "Why didn't you tell me? Would it have changed how you treated me?" I don't know, maybe." "That's exactly why I didn't tell you," Marcus said gently. "I wanted you to know me for who I am, not what my family owns. I wanted our friendship to be real, not based on what you thought you could gain from knowing me." That evening, Alexander sat in his room, staring at the research he had compiled about Williams Innovations Group. Marcus's family wasn't just wealthy, they were revolutionizing entire industries while maintaining such a low profile that most people had never heard of them despite their massive impact on the world. When his father came to say goodnight, Alexander confronted him with the truth. "Dad, Marcus isn't a scholarship student. His family's worth about $12 billion. Richard Sterling froze in the doorway. "That's impossible. Williams Innovations Group. Look it up." Alexander watched his father's face change as he processed the information, saw the exact moment when Richard realized the magnitude of his misconceptions. $12 billion, Richard repeated slowly. They developed the new electric vehicle technology that's supposed to replace gas engines entirely. They created solar panels that could end the energy crisis. They've been featured in Forbes and Fortune, but they never do interviews or public appearances. Richard sat down heavily on Alexander's bed. Why would someone with that kind of wealth send their child to mix with... He trailed off, apparently recognizing how his own words sounded. "With people like us," Alexander finished. "Maybe because they don't think money makes them better than other people. But the boy's clothes, his behavior, the way he carries himself, he's humble, Dad. He doesn't think he needs to prove anything to anyone." Richard was quiet for a long time, processing this revelation and what it meant about his own assumptions and prejudices. "Alexander," he said finally, "I think I owe you and your friend an apology." The next day, Alexander approached Marcus with a mixture of excitement and nervousness. "Marcus, I have to ask you something, and I want you to be completely honest." "Okay." "When I said that stuff about your kind not belonging here, when I treated you like you were poor, when I acted like I was better than you because of my family's money, how did that make you feel?" Marcus considered the question seriously. "It made me sad," he said finally. "Not because you hurt my feelings, but because I could see how much those attitudes were hurting you. You were missing out on really knowing people because you were too focused on what you thought they could or couldn't offer you. I'm sorry, Alexander said, and meant it more deeply than he had ever meant anything in his life. I know you are, and I forgive you. But more importantly, I hope you learned something about judging people based on appearances. I did. I learned that my dad was wrong about a lot of things. Your dad wasn't trying to be cruel, Alex. He was teaching you what he had been taught, but that doesn't mean those lessons were right. Over the following months, Alexander's friendship with Marcus deepened into something genuine and transformative. Through Marcus, Alexander learned about using wealth responsibly, about the importance of humility and kindness, and about seeing people as individuals rather than representatives of social categories. More importantly, Marcus introduced Alexander to his family. Dr. Patricia Williams and Dr. James Williams were nothing like what Alexander had expected from billionaires. They lived in a beautiful but not ostentatious home, drove efficient rather than flashy cars, and treated everyone, from their son's friends to service workers, with genuine respect and warmth. The purpose of success, Dr. Patricia Williams explained to Alexander during one of many dinners at their home, isn't to elevate yourself above others, it's to lift others up with you. But don't you want people to know how successful you are? Alexander asked. The people who matter already know, Dr. James Williams replied, and the people who don't matter will judge us regardless of what we achieve. We'd rather be known for what we contribute than for what we accumulate. Alexander began spending more time with the Williams family than with his own, drawn to their warmth, their intellectual curiosity, and their genuine care for making the world better. He learned about their charitable foundations, their environmental initiatives, and their commitment to using their wealth to solve problems rather than just generate more money. When Richard Sterling finally met the Williams family at a school function, the encounter was both humbling and eye-opening. Mr. Williams, Richard said, approaching Marcus's father with visible nervousness, I want to apologize for some assumptions I made about your son. Dr. James Williams smiled warmly. No apology necessary, Mr. Sterling. We're all guilty of making assumptions sometimes. The important thing is being willing to recognize when we're wrong and learn from the experience. Your son has been a wonderful influence on Alexander, Richard continued. He's taught him things about humility and character that I'm afraid I never properly emphasized. Alexander's a good boy with a kind heart, Dr. Patricia Williams added. Marcus is lucky to have him as a friend. Later that evening, Richard Sterling had a long conversation with his son. Alexander, I need to tell you something important. For years, I've taught you that our family's wealth made us superior to others. I've encouraged you to judge people based on their economic status rather than their character. I was wrong. I know, Dad. The Williams family has shown me something I had forgotten, that true success isn't about accumulating wealth or status symbols. It's about using whatever advantages you have to make a positive difference in the world. Does this mean you're going to change how you do business? Richard smiled. I'm going to try, and I'm hoping you'll help me remember what really matters. Years later, Alexander Sterling and Marcus Williams would maintain their friendship through high school, college, and into their professional careers. Alexander would eventually transform Sterling Industries into a company focused on sustainable manufacturing and ethical business practices, inspired by the values his childhood friend had taught him. Marcus would continue his family's tradition of quiet philanthropy and revolutionary innovation, developing technologies that would help solve climate change, poverty, and disease while never seeking personal recognition or glory. But the most important transformation happened in Alexander himself. He learned that true wealth isn't measured in dollars, but in the quality of your relationships, the positive impact you have on others, and the legacy you leave behind. You know what the best part of our friendship has been? Alexander asked Marcus at their high school graduation. Oh, what's that? You taught me that the richest person in the room isn't always the one with the most money. Sometimes it's the one with the most wisdom, the most kindness, or the most humility. Marcus smiled. And you taught me that people can change, that assumptions can be overcome, and that friendship can bridge any divide if both people are willing to see beyond the surface. Their friendship became a legend at Pemberton Academy, told and retold as an example of how assumptions based on appearance or perceived social status can blind us to the extraordinary people right in front of us. The story of the billionaire's son and the scholarship kid, who was actually richer than his entire family, reminded everyone that true wealth comes in many forms and that the most valuable friendships are built on mutual respect and understanding rather than social status or financial advantage. Dr. Patricia Williams would often tell other parents, "The greatest gift we can give our children isn't money or status symbols. It's the wisdom to see the value in every person they meet, regardless of that person's circumstances or appearance." Richard Sterling, transformed by his son's friendship and his own misconceptions, became one of the most vocal advocates for educational equity and social justice in his business community. He established scholarship programs, mentorship initiatives, and business partnerships specifically designed to break down the barriers that prevent talented individuals from underrepresented communities from reaching their full potential. "My son taught me," Richard would say in speeches to other business leaders, "that the most expensive mistake you can make is judging someone's worth based on their appearance, their background, or their apparent circumstances. You might be dismissing the very person who could change your life, your business, or your understanding of the world." If this story touched your heart, remember that everyone you meet has a story, talents, and experiences that might surprise you. The next time you encounter someone whose circumstances seem different from your own, take the time to really get to know them. Listen to their ideas, learn from their experiences, and judge them by their character rather than their appearance or perceived social status. True friendship knows no boundaries of race, class, or economic status. The richest relationships are built on mutual respect, genuine caring, and the recognition that every person has inherent worth, regardless of their material circumstances. And remember, the wealthiest person in the room might not be the one wearing the most expensive clothes or driving the flashiest car. Sometimes they're the one who understands that real wealth lies in wisdom, kindness, and the positive impact you have on others, values that can't be bought but can be shared freely with anyone wise enough to recognize their worth. Thank you very much for listening. Please let us know what you think of this story in the comments. Don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Turn on notifications so you don't miss any other videos.